Hello, my name is Alex Osterwalder, inventor of the business model canvas, but mainly entrepreneur and thinker around anything innovation and strategy.
And great to have you back on. Welcome back. I'm just thinking about all the tools that I use with clients. I mean, we were just doing a session this morning with a client, and things like AI, whereas we might do an exercise in the past about, say, like, what is your company purpose? And we'd have 6 people in a room and nobody could think of anything. There's an essence of it there, but you couldn't, in a short session, you might not be able to nail it. But now with ChatGPT or various other, whatever your flavor is, you can get some of that essence and you can wordsmith something that, everybody's very happy with in a way which is just changed completely, or, you can point ChatGPT at somebody's website and say, based on this website, what do you think their core values are? And it will give you an answer. Now, you might not like the answer, but it'll give you an answer, which is just changed, using some of these tools. What's your experience in the last sort of year and a half or what have you since ChatGPT's around as you think about, various tools that you use and coach people on?
I think this is a big thing. And I think we're still in the phase where I like to call it filming theater. So when, people invented the camera and film, you could record stuff. Well, what's the first thing they did is they recorded theater, because that's the world they knew, theater, right? So there was no such thing as thinking film. So I think we're only grappling with the possibilities of what AI can help us do today in terms of process to innovate, but also in terms of the new value propositions and new business models. Now, why are we at a change? Because the discipline is not new. It's like 70 years old. AI is not new per se, but the accessibility for all of us has completely changed. So the way I like to frame it, looking past, some big changes. When Tim Berners-Lee invented the first web browser, the internet became accessible to everybody. That was a big change, right? Internet existed before, but it wasn't really accessible until we had the graphical kind of browser. And then the second big thing.
Well, for those of us who are old enough, it was like go up folder levels, come down folder levels, go to a different. It wasn't a thing. It's like telling your children, you see something on TV and they go, "What's that?" And it's like a cassette tape. What does that do?
And then, so that changed the accessibility of the internet. The internet was not new, but as you said, you're pulling around files and you had command lines, and then comes the graphical browser. Amazing, right? And then you have that next phase where Amazon, launched Amazon Web Services and gave everybody with a credit card, in particular developers in the first phase, access to one of the world's best web IT infrastructures. So instead of buying servers and putting them all together and even understanding how to do that, technically that was complicated and was definitely expensive. You didn't have to do that anymore. You could just use a credit card and get access to Amazon's web infrastructure. All you needed to do was, put in your credit card. Like, you didn't have to go and talk to IBM or Dell or so and buy servers and put that up. That was a big change, right? So a lot of startups popped up. I think this is what we're seeing combined today. I do think OpenAI and ChatGPT made this change happen in terms of accessibility. Now everybody's following. So guess what happens? The floodgates are open. All of us can start developing stuff based on these application programming interfaces, APIs. And, with the no-code movement, we don't really need to understand very much. That's the game changer. So all of us have the power of AI and Gen AI in our hands. Well, guess what's going to happen? Innovation is going to go through the roof.
Do you have some examples that you like at the minute, things that you find personally useful?
Well, I'm a CEO of a company strategizer, so I'm a bit scared that, AI and Gen AI is going to disrupt us. So guess what? I have to deal with this not just on a fun basis, but for the survival of my organization, of my company. So we're really looking at how embedding AI into what we do with our programs on platform around innovation. And the first and very simple thing is, all of our content, the books, the videos, are accessible through a chatbot. It's much better than Alex because you go into the chatbot and your videos are served up with, oh, here's a video. I don't remember where did we put these videos? What are the links? So that thing is better than me. And it seems to speak, a lot of languages. I speak maybe 3, maximum 4. And so that's one big change. Just for us. And then another thing is, there's one thing that we're looking at the moment in innovation to do customer interviews. We use a simple tool called value scenes, where you show an image, certain structure to your customers to understand, are they interested or not in the value proposition that you have in mind before building anything. So guess what? You'd have to draw this or take little drawn pieces. Most people don't like to draw. And even when we give them little elements to put together with speech bubbles and so, they don't feel comfortable. So, one of our clients, they mandate a sketcher for $500 to make sketches of these value scenes. And it takes some time and it costs money. Well, guess what? Today, there are tools that we can integrate on our platform so that in milliseconds, you can generate the image. And, in perfect kind of either sketch note style, photographic style. So just that, generating these things is like completely different. So that's a very simple way of using stuff, make things concrete. And it points towards getting quick prototypes with the right prompts, super powerful. Do we still need today the human intellect or the interaction behind it? Actually, it means we need more qualified people to work with the power of AI and generative AI, because it generates stuff and then we have to qualify it as good or not so good. So that means we have to get better. I think there's a whole army of mediocre people, white collar workers who are not world class, who are going to disappear because they have no more job. Because you know what? I don't need, some kind of junior consultant to make a report for me because I asked the right questions. The report is here in milliseconds. Now I need to judge, is that Gen AI stuff that was spit out actually useful or not? Because Gen AI still invents stuff that is actually not true.
Again, looking back in history, whenever something disruptive happens and you go, oh, there's loads of people who lost jobs. Actually, we've got amazing levels of employment and there are now 8 billion people on the planet. So we must have generated some jobs as a result of the railways and TV and computers. And we just don't know what they are and what the redistribution is going to be. I was talking to a CEO the other day, and he said, have you chatted to ChatGPT 4.0? And I said, yes, I have. We put it on in the car. The kids love to ask the most ridiculous questions in the world. So, instead of you being the dad and the kids saying, well, why, but why, but why? Now you can get an answer. But he was saying, look, he said, I reckon by the end of the year, he said, we might be able to replace 10% of our frontline staff who are answering phone calls because we don't have to build the logic tree. We can just, in the same way you say, we can push the chatbot at, all of our internal resources. Actually, you can have and because there's not a tree, you can have a discourse. You can actually get to the thing you want or the person you need or the answer by the end of the year is his prediction, which is hugely quicker than I thought it might happen.
So 2 things actually will happen. And, you talk to a couple of people, they'll say, well, we're probably going to take those cost savings and then allocate them to something else to create better services, right? So that money doesn't necessarily go away, but what will change is jobs will radically change. So on a macro level, I think we'll see a lot of positivity, but on a micro level, there will be, hardship. Some people will be affected. So again, big picture, I think this is going to be extremely positive. Well, I'm positive thinking, but on a micro level, it's going to mean a big shift for a lot of people. Now, also, just thinking about the possibilities, I actually think some things that, again, filming theater, so we're looking at, talk to people, there are a lot about improvements. But you know what? I asked recently at a conference, who thinks that AI and Gen AI is going to come up with better value propositions for customers than human beings? So now we're tackling the core thing where we think we're still better, is creativity. Well, I believe we're going to see AI propose better value propositions. Why? Because one of the strengths of AI is to take a lot of different data sources, and from that, create something new. So extremely customized value propositions from behavior, from other sources. That's something humans have a hard time doing. So I actually do believe we're going to see better value propositions popping up from AI, more more powerful than humans ever could think of.
That's scary.
Well, let me give you a scarier one. So I talked to Vala Afshar, who's one of the chief digital evangelists at Salesforce, and he believes that some of us are going to have AI bosses. So we're not going to be managed by people anymore. Some of us will be managed by an AI bot. That's scary. That's even scarier than just better value propositions. Think of it.
Oh, do you know what? There are plenty of bosses that I've had who I think AI would be an upgrade. Right?
Okay, that's the positive. Yeah.
I just,
maybe.
They might even seem to care more, even though I know that there's not really a person there at all. They'll just be better at the person that I have worked for, who was a human, who definitely didn't care.
AI will know what you want to hear, right? So, but there's
totally
other applications. I think it's fascinating, and that's where I think new value propositions. So, a friend of mine, Marshall Goldsmith, who's #1 leadership coach in the world, coached some of the best people on the planet. He created MarshallBot. So, MarshallBot is a better version of Marshall Goldsmith. So he believes, because it's in 40 languages, etc. But here's the other thing: if we think leadership development, think of it. A lot of our meetings are on Zoom. So I could get direct feedback from Zoom. For example, we should actually suggest that as a product feature, that as soon as me as a leader, I'm getting emotional. That you can detect through micromimicry, right?
You can get that now.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Well, I was talking to somebody last week, and they said, oh, no, there's now a plugin for Zoom which gives you real-time feedback in a sales context. Stop talking, listen. And I was chatting to a guy who's got a recruitment platform, and it gives it doesn't give, certainly when I spoke to him a little while ago, it didn't give real-time feedback, but it gave feedback saying, this was the balance of the conversation, giving you feedback after the call, sort of going through and saying, if this was the interview and you wanted to hire this person, you could have done a better job.
It's no surprise, right? So here's, where companies that have been world-class with AI, things like this have already existed. So if you take Ping An, Chinese conglomerate in banking and insurance, they've done interesting stuff before it became extremely visible and popular, with OpenAI. So they had something that we can discuss the ethics of it, but they had a loan application process where AI would study your facial expressions to approve a loan or not. So to see if you're lying or not. And I can tell you, again, we can discuss the ethics of all of that. What should we allow and what should we not allow in terms of regulation? But for their business performance, that went through the roof. Less loan defaults. They could approve more loans faster. So it made a phenomenal difference. Now, again, the big difference is today, you do not need to be as specialized. So Ping An hired, hundreds of PhDs to become world-class in AI. Today, we have access to that same kind of power simply through APIs. That's what I think is the fascinating part. Before, this was reserved to a small group of large companies with the right resources. Today, because some large companies are giving you the possibility to access AI and Gen AI, we're at a different level of innovation simply from a numbers game perspective. Imagine you have 1,000 people coming up with a new app. There's probably one that's really good, right? If you have 10 people coming up with a new app, it's unlikely that one is going to be crazy good. So the numbers game will simply give us a lot more innovation that we never imagined before.
Oh, maybe. Or you get convergence. And so a bit like modern pop music, it all just sounds the same because there's an algorithm that says...
You still have some standing out, right?
You do, but there's a thing that stand out. Follow the algorithm, or does it take some chance? And also, I was actually, as you were talking though, when you were talking about the facial expression thing for loans, I think it's in Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink, where he talks about, is it the Rotman Institute or Grotman Institute? Anyway, somebody could look at a couple having a conversation, I think, without the sound on and for 15 seconds and make some 95% accuracy. Like, because the whole thing with Blink is it's like trust your gut, but you don't know why. Now you'd be able to take that and go, what is the algorithm? Like, what is it that he's seeing that says this couple will stay together or not? And you'd be able to.
I think we should go. Before we get into a relationship, let's use AI. But so that's the thing, that there will be so many applications that we haven't imagined, because a lot of this is known, but we can't yet integrate the data sources. So if you do actually, I happen to be interested in that space. If you do take couples, it's relatively predictable based on certain things. But I think what we can't do yet fully is integrate all of the kind of data sources to really get a more accurate picture. So we have to have complicated setups to understand some of this. So I think the data is going to be crazy. Now think of, us having devices where we measure a lot of our kind of body, inputs. There's going to be an unbelievable amount of breakthrough innovations that were not possible before, just because of the amount of data is actually there, but we can't really use that data in smart ways. When I do think AI and Gen AI will help us use that data in smarter ways.
And the integration of these tools in your sort of consulting process, it's so far given you a better result, or it's giving you a result faster, or both?
I think it's a mix. So some of the things are just faster. Like, again, do I need to study the business environment of a company by hiring an expensive consultancy? Absolutely not, right? So with the right questions, I can produce a relatively robust environmental scanning. Will I get breakthrough things from that? Absolutely not. But just the speed of that stuff, so that you can work immediately on, new value propositions, new business models within a good understanding of the context. You just go a lot faster. Or the silly one I mentioned, value scenes. So getting an image, during a workshop, and then 10 seconds later, you could actually call a client and show them the value scenes with pretty high, kind of granularity of those drawings. That speed will get you to results faster. Where I think we haven't yet fully arrived is in the development of better value propositions. The stuff I mentioned, that I believe we're going to get better value propositions by integrating the right data sources. We're a bit further away from that, because a lot of these data sources are in different companies. So what's also going to happen is we're going to need to figure out business models between different companies with the right data sources. So you're already starting to see this kind of emerge in the car industry. Not all the car manufacturers have the same kind of data as a Tesla with, autopilots and stuff on the road. So what we're going to see is more alliances between different companies with different kinds of data sources. Take a Whoop band or the Apple, there's stuff there, data that is going to be ultra in demand. Take the pharmaceutical world. There's going to be data that pharmaceutical companies will want that they do not have today. So there's going to be a fight for data sources, I believe, in the future.
Yeah, exclude other people as competitive advantage to the data. Just to pick your brains on value scenes, then, how do they get used in your process?
So it's very simple, right? So to get feedback on a value proposition that you want, you can explain things hard to grasp. You could make videos, kind of production intensive. You can hack it fast, but the quality will be mediocre. But if you make a drawing, you can make a value proposition pretty tangible very quickly. So it's just that kind of stuff that you will be able to do much faster. And in our case, we integrate these things into processes that are automated, so that as an innovator, I don't need to learn how to do interviews. I don't need to learn anything anymore. I just need to schedule a call with my potential customers, and everything else is done for you. So the speed is going to be much faster, but also the learning curve required from you. Today, you have to learn how to do a good interview because it's not so easy. Customer interviews are actually pretty hard if you want to do them well. That should go away, because some of that, the workload of it, the time it requires, should be done by AI and Gen AI. So we always think of cost savings and time savings, because that's the thing that is most annoying for innovators today. We have no time to innovate and we have no money to innovate. Well, guess what? That's why you need processes that will take away the cost and the time it requires.
So do that environmental scan. There's a framework embedded in there. It says these are the bits of data we don't have. So these are the questions to ask.
Exactly. Yeah.
You don't even need the interviewer.
So this is something we're looking at. So one of our coaches is doing interviews with AI bots rather than real people. And you know what? In the early phase of innovation, actually an AI bot can very well represent a potential customer if you have the right data sources behind it. So you might not have to interview real people. So guess what? The speed is going to go up. So again, there's crazy stuff. And, some of the things we're just evaluating today to say what's useful at what stage. But, this process is going to change fundamentally. So I think, what we underestimate is how business processes will change, in particular in those domains that we think are very human: strategy making, decision making between different options. There are a lot of things where we believe humans are better. I'm not so sure. I would challenge some of that, to be honest, because if I look at the strategy making processes and how strategy is made, I think AI support, again, as a co-pilot, is going to get us into completely different spheres of strategy making.
You can tell that Terminator and all these weren't written by AI because in all these movies we beat the machines, but like the machines must be a bit dim if they can't outwit us.
Yeah, but if you do look at AI today, we compare it to human intelligence. It's not. So there's still a huge difference, and there's different camps. Some that are trying to go more towards human intelligence, but the dominating camp around OpenAI and ChatGPT, and so like those things are not comparable to human intelligence for at least another decade or two. So I'm not so afraid. I think the co-pilot thing is going to still, be around for a while.
And so, what else are you working on at the minute? What are other topics or things that are occupying your mind in this space of innovation that you work in?
I think the other big one is obviously environmental sustainability, and talking about AI and the energy consumption. They're actually linked. So I'm excited about new business models and value propositions that can help us harmonize profit and impact, because often we talk about zero consumption growth or so. That's just not realistic. Like, how are you going to ask whole new generation of people emerging from poverty to not consume like us? That's just unfair. Like, that's not going to happen. It's just unrealistic. So what we need is better business models that make growth possible, but in the right way. We have to work towards that. It's not just going to come from efficiency innovation, right? One is, let's make better processes for what we're doing. How can we create businesses that have less negative environmental impact? But I think what I'm really excited about is businesses that rethink the business model. I'll give you a silly example. In the oil and gas industry, power purchasing agreements allowed oil and gas producers to sell energy over several years, decade or so. That allowed entrepreneurs like Jigger Shaw, he built Sun Edison, to bring power purchasing agreements to the solar panel industry, so that he could help solar create a breakthrough. Now power purchasing agreements are a normal thing in solar. Now I just learned something from the person who's running innovation sustainability at BNP Paribas in Silicon Valley. And he said, well, in the vertical farming industry, we're using power purchasing agreements as well. So what is vertical farming? It's not using fields, but growing plants or strawberries or whatever in a warehouse under artificial conditions with artificial light and watering. And that's very controllable. But now that's very expensive from an infrastructure point of view. But now with power purchasing agreements, again, now it's not power, it's strawberry purchasing agreements. You can sell those to a retailer over a decade at a fixed price because the environment is controllable. So remember, oil and gas and all that was not controllable, but these agreements allow you to do something that wasn't possible before. So that's just one example of financing something that can go to scale. So we're going to see in the whole environmental sustainability space a lot of breakthroughs when these business models become a bit more commonplace. So one of the things I'd be excited about, we haven't found the financing, so maybe somebody wants to jump on board, is a booklet or a pattern library of those business model patterns in sustainability that harmonize profit and impact. Because I believe there's a space for that. Not everything has to be for profit, but guess what? When it's for profit, it's more likely to grow. So if we can harmonize positive environmental impact with profit, guess what? It's going to grow. And that was the case for Son Edison under Jigger Shaw in the first years before he sold the company.
I was doing something with Kyan Krippendorf recently, and he's got an Excel spreadsheet, and it's about driving innovation or strategic thought. And so you sort of say, look, am I on the front foot? Am I being offensive or defensive? Am I the big player or am I David or Goliath, right? It's various sort of inputs. And then you almost spin the wheel and it goes, right, here's a list of things. And so what you're suggesting is there's a whole load of things like power purchase agreements or that sort of financing over the long term as a thing, which you might not have thought about in your space. But does that, if you then thought about bringing that across from another industry, does that give you something you might want to go and then, work through to a product or some solution? Yeah.
In technology and product innovation, that was much more difficult. In business models, it's possible. So we already came up with a business model pattern library in the Invincible Company book, but that is just for profit, right? And there's great opportunities there for entrepreneurs and innovators to come up with new business models and sometimes bring technology to the market that wasn't possible before with the right business models. So we already created that pattern library for business models in general for profit. I think there can be a very specific inspiration for these patterns that are sustainable. And as you said, then I can import those business models from another field just by understanding them into my own. And I can understand, oh, wow, I can come up with a new sustainable business model for this and for that. And, there are a couple of things there that are taking off, but not everybody knows, like the power purchasing agreement. So there's some of these that really work and that we would just have to import into our own field. But that, requires something very simple that is accessible to everybody, because case studies alone is not enough. It's really about understanding the pattern of the business model, because cases are much too specific.
Is this your next project? Is there a invincible business or sustainable business book coming out soon?
I work on stuff that actually makes sense for my own company and that can be financed. So, I've been thinking about these things. I just coming back from Norway, where we had a conversation around sustainability with Innovation Norway. Norway is the land of Teslas, by the way, because they were subsidizing these early on. And it's a country that has to make this transition from oil and gas into something more sustainable. So it's really top of the agenda of Innovation Norway. So we're thinking about these, but I will only go deeper on it when we find the financing to make this possible at scale.
That's sort of environmental sustainability, but is there a sort of a micro business sustainability angle as well? That businesses need to be sustainable, and by sustainable, I suppose, I'm not sure that whether I mean business sustainability from an environmental perspective. So business net zero, or whether businesses go on forever. I suppose it could be both.
Number one, that's why we look at it as layers. Number one, any business has to be financially sustainable, because you're not going to survive for very long if you have a positive impact on the environment, but you're going out of business because you're broke. So number one, you still have to get the basics right. And the basics are financial sustainability, the resilience of your business model. So, I always like to think of both. There's a business layer, and then there's an impact layer, which could be environmental impact or social impact. So now if we take the business layer, There's actually something interesting which I underestimated, but one of our coaches, Michael Wilkins in Denmark, took it on, and he started to work with companies to shift them from a less resilient financial model or revenue model to a more resilient revenue model. And I'll give you a silly thing, right, which is basic business stuff. When you sell transactionally, let's say you're selling yogurt or whatever else, right, toys, you have to sell again and again and again. If you're selling a subscription, you sell once, and then you need to make sure that you have a small churn, recurring revenues. So that's obvious, right, to show these two. Well, what's not so obvious is how do you shift a transactional model to one with recurring revenues, maybe even without a subscription. I'll give you a silly example and a historic one because, we want to learn from the history, the iPod. So what people do not know is the iPod, was a hardware and software innovation. So Steve Jobs went on stage and said, it's the first time we can put 1,000 songs in a pocket, which was difficult back then, not today, of course. Yeah. But what people didn't realize is that was a strategy to lock us in. Because once you put 1,000 songs into iTunes, onto the iPod back in the day, guess what? The next time you would buy a device, you'd say, oh, that Sony device looks pretty good. Wow, but man, I have all my music in iTunes. It's going to be a pain. So you go back, as long as the devices are pretty good, which, Apple made sure, you would go back because you started to be locked in. They created switching costs. So they built a financially sustainable model by shifting you, not to a subscription model, but actually to a model where you would keep on buying iPods. So that, I believe, was the foundation of Apple's iPhone empire today. And now they're doing it with services. So imagine that's financial resilience. That's revenue stream resilience. Every company should think, how can I make my revenue streams more resilient? Which is a very basic business question, but that I don't see enough. And what I don't see enough is the knowledge of how to do that.
Oh, I mean, Costco, let's have a membership model and then guarantee low prices, but you have to buy in bulk. I don't know that anyone's ever gone to Costco and come away with spending less than $500, right? And or Amazon with Prime. Now it includes free delivery and free returns. So, and still, I go and find something else that's not on Amazon, and I go to buy it, and it's like, oh, I have to pay for delivery, and then I have to pay to send it back, and you just like sort of takes your breath away. Still, every time, just get so used to some of these things. But in the IT world that I work in, there's sort of maybe there's two camps. There's recurring revenue and professional services, and everybody with recurring revenue wants some professional services, and everyone with professional services wants recurring revenue, and there's a constant battle, and there's something in the middle which is sort of prepaid professional services, or if you can't get recurring revenue, we can get repeat revenue. And if we can show that over time, it might be valued by outside purchasers the same as if it was recurring revenue. These are constant conversations that one is great for scaling over time, the other is great for scaling quickly, pros and cons, just fascinating conversations to try and say to people, where are we? What opportunities have we got? And that sort of pattern matching, I find great fun to do with clients.
And there's not enough thought about that, right? Because a lot of times people have a business model for an industry in mind and they stick to that. So, I mean, think of, again, historic examples, selling coffee. Well, before Nespresso invented the pods to put into the machine and you were locked in until their patents expired, there was no lock-in. So it was a transactional business model. And then Nespresso emerged as a recurring revenue kind of giant in the coffee space. So those things you can copy. So I think there's a huge opportunity to think, okay, this is how our entire industry has done business so far. Is that really the best way? Because people do not tend to challenge the current way of working simply because it's been like that forever. So us doing that in that space is super important. How do we create more resilient revenue streams? And the other space is pricing. And just blown away how few companies actually experiment with pricing. So they think logically about a price and then they launch that price and it works or not. Well, today you can actually experiment with 3-4 different prices with ABC tests, and you pick the one that performs best, and you'd be surprised. I mean, the number of times we've done this and the highest prices perform best, we didn't even think people would pay that much. But because we did experiments before launching a price, we didn't actually think about it a little bit, but then we immediately ran an experiment. So we get evidence of which price people are willing to pay for. And that's the kind of practice that is not commonplace yet. What types of revenue streams are people willing to use, and what pricing models?
I think you're right. I think people, is it the CEO of Delta said, if I've got two people on the same plane paying the same price for the same seat, it's not working. Our pricing algorithm's not working. But you know what? Because it's counterintuitive, that's the first thing that I think we might have come up with where we could not AI, because, we've sort of thought about it and you have to test it, right? So without the test, right, there's no data. So it's not as if you could go, well, historically, because if you do that, it doesn't predict the future in terms of, might point you in the right direction, but you're still going to have to do the test to see what happens. This combination of product and pricing and delivery and service wrapper and what have you.
Well, I think the scary part that you just made me think of is when AI can figure out what I'm willing to pay, because then people with the strongest purchasing powers and the highest need are going to see the highest price. Because
that happens already, because you've got your Apple phone, you pay more for stuff than I do, because I'm on my Android phone, and the algorithm knows that you're wealthier than I am, so it charges you more and you're happy.
More price sensitive. No, I think that already happens, but it will happen with completely new data sources, which also shows the importance of regulation. So I'm an entrepreneur, like the less regulation for me as a business, the more positive, but as a human being, a part of the society, I think regulation is going to have a huge role to play. Otherwise, it's going to be a crazy, scary world when our data is going to be used in crazy ways. So I'm a bit afraid of that if we don't, have the right kind of regulation that doesn't stifle business, but that actually helps use the full potential of AI without the downsides.
Yeah, so you got a sense of where in the world we'll end up with the best innovation in legislation around AI?
Hard to say. Frankly, it's hard to say because over-regulation, wrong understanding. I'm not the right person to ask about that today, and I think everybody's struggling with it. And regulation will always be behind. So the fear I have a little bit is that we'll let the thing out of the box and it'll be too late. So it's a bit of an interesting world in that sense today. Regulation can never follow, and the speed of change in what's possible in AI is insane. Like right now, things are changing so fast that things we didn't believe were possible, 3 months ago are possible today. So there's no way regulation can follow. It's a bit of a tricky kind of situation at the moment.
I mean, even I think last week Google released Notebook LM in the UK, so it's the largest number of tokens available in terms of setting context. So I could upload the books I've written, upload all the blog posts I've written, and then ask it for examples that I've already given in the past. Because you were talking about video, and like video, there's a video, like as a chunk of maybe 30 minutes, right? You can catalog that, but using an anecdote in X number of stories that you might have told over time, even I can't remember any of those, nor can any of my team. But like here we are writing a new piece of content, which examples that we might have used in the past would be pertinent to this piece, and it's like just pulls them out and slots them in. So that change in 2 weeks has been, I think, is astounding, and it took 15 minutes to pull that all together. I didn't have to code anything.
There you go. It's crazy. The speed of change at the moment in that space is hard to follow. Nobody I know today who I talk to in this field, even the experts, they have a hard time keeping up.
Well, or even then predicting the future, because it's just like your field of vision is like 10 feet in front of you, because you can't. So predicting the future is just, it's like the week before the iPhone launched and then the week after. It's like before it launched, nobody knew they needed one. And then afterwards, the world had changed forever.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that it also creates opportunities. So, in this space of creating value with AI, the people I talked to just recently all said everybody's new to this. So again, not AI as a discipline is not new at all, but what you can do with it and how we create business value, everybody's new to that piece because the change is so fast, which is a great opportunity for, startups and people who want to get started. There's, it's like when the open web, again, not the internet per se, but when the web started, that was a big change because a lot of people could experiment, and obviously then all the bubbles that come with it. I do think we're in that kind of space on steroids today with AI. So everybody's new to the possibilities of how to create business value. It's not new as a discipline, but the accessibility to all of us and the number of people that are starting to experiment with this is completely different. So it's, if you really want to go deep, today is the opportunity to create new stuff. The new Googles are going to happen now. So it's a fun moment. It's a bit different because you do have some incumbents that manage the infrastructure. That's different from the web era, where the incumbents were not the ones managing the infrastructure.
What books have you been reading recently that you enjoyed?
Actually, very little books. So I'm really into one podcast in particular. So I listen to Harry Stebbings' 20-minute VC. He brings not just the best VCs on his show, but now also the best product and sales leaders. So I've been really into that. And since I'm in the phase of scaling at the moment, Ella Jill's, scaling book has been a big one for me, Blitz Scaling from Reid Hoffman. So there's not that much good stuff yet around scaling. And then talking about product market fit. So again, not a book, but a web resource. There's this first round VC has created a great product market fit playbook. So it's very, very good. Generally, I haven't seen a lot of good stuff around product market fit. So the playbook by first round VC has been pretty powerful.
What's your genius?
No fear of failure.
What did you last fail at then?
Ton of stuff like in sales experiments, looking stupid in front of people I'm trying to sell. And then, you fail 10 times until you figure out what actually works.
Okay. What unpopular opinion do you hold?
I think this whole idea of harmonizing impact and profit, some people do not really like that, right? They don't understand, you can really get wealthy by doing the right thing. So I'm fascinated by entrepreneurs who change the world, around sustainability. And I don't care if they get filthy rich, right? So there's sometimes this belief, if you want to work on poverty alleviation, you make a difference, you can't become rich yourself. I actually am super fascinated by entrepreneurs who change the world in a positive way and get rich in the process. I find that inspiring. I think that's an unpopular opinion.
What's the worst business advice you've ever received?
I think, a lot of people tell you what you should do. And as an entrepreneur, the question is, what's the next thing to do? So, you have 100 things you should do. You have 10 things you have to do. And then there's 2 things that you can't afford to do because you have so limited resources. So I don't really care when people tell me, what I'm supposed to do. When they tell me, why is that the most important thing, given the other decisions you have to make? That's when, you understand true entrepreneurship, because hard is, what's the next thing you do? What's going to give you the biggest bang for the buck? Because you have 10 things you have to do, but 8 you can't afford to do because you don't have enough resources, time, money, people. There are only 2 things you can do. So what are those 2 out of 10? That's the hard part. And nobody ever frames it that way.
What's the most recent thing you've learned or recent skill you've acquired?
I'm learning a lot more around sustainability. So typically, how to finance vertical farming. I'm really fascinated about things in the environmental sustainability space.
One last thing. If you had to think about your eulogy, what do you want to be remembered for?
It doesn't really matter. I'll be dead anyway, so.
Excellent. Alex, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on again.
It was a real pleasure. Love the conversation with you every time.